It's Connor Duffy in Washington. Well, this week Australia's immigration policy was back in the spotlight. Home Affairs Minister Peter Dutton says he supports the current permanent migration intake of 190,000 people.
But he says it should be reviewed regularly, and Tony Abbott has suggested cutting the number substantially to deal with issues like congestion and house prices. For more on this and other topics, we're talking now with Labor MP Pat Conroy from Newcastle and Liberal MP Craig Kelly. Thanks both for
great to be with you.
Craig, are all ministers in the coalition cabinet united when it comes to immigration?
Oh, look, I can't speak for the ministers individually in the cabinet, but look, it's correct we should be having a debate about the immigration levels of this country. The traffic problems that we're having in Sydney, the over-congestion on our public transport, the additional money we need to spend on infrastructure to try and get roads up. We need to make sure that whatever levels of our immigration are at the federal level, that's coordinated with the state governments and with the local governments.
Are you speaking from personal experience? You just say you were late into the studio this morning because of traffic congestion. You said you struggled to get through the Sydney roads. Is this not, though, more down to poor planning?
Oh, this is where the planning needs to be coordinated. Now, it's very difficult to plan if we've got like 200,000+ people coming into the country every year, and most of those people have been settling in Sydney also and in Melbourne. Now, if we could somehow work out to get more people settling in our regional areas, perhaps we could even increase the rates of immigration in the country. So look, it's very important that we're talking about this issue, and we're talking about on the basis of planning, so there is that coordination between the federal government, state governments and local councils.
Pat, do you think our immigration levels should be adjusted at all?
I don't, quite frankly. What we need is greater planning and greater infrastructure investment. One thing I agree with Craig is we need more investment in infrastructure, and it's a pity that his government cut their planned spending on infrastructure last year by over $1 billion. So that's the real solution. I do agree that we need to encourage more migrants into regional areas such as mine, where we need more growth and we need better planning. But this cabinet debate has been a farce. We had the Prime Minister saying it wasn't discussed, we had the Immigration Minister saying, well, it was discussed, we had leaks to competing journalists. This whole thing was shambolic and symbolic of a government that is degenerating before our very eyes.
And Craig, we've also seen during the week some sort of adjustment in the levels. Peter Dutton, essentially what he's done is there are some 44,000 places in the skilled independent visa program. Now New Zealanders are a part of that. Is that a bit of a devious way of adjusting those levels as far as immigration from other countries are concerned?
Oh, look, not really. Not only is the overall number important as well, but it's also the visa categories within that particular number. Now, we know under the Labor Party, under Kevin Rudd, that number got as high as 300,000. We had. Now, that was far, far too high for the planning that we had. So it's very easy for Pat to hear and slag off about, the governments, new state governments and Liberal governments not doing enough. When we had 300,000 in that year from Kevin Rudd, of course we're going to get ourselves into trouble with not having enough housing starts in the nation. Now, it also is important that we make sure we've got our mix of skilled visa, humanitarian visa, all the different types of categories that we have to have that mix right as well within the overall quantity.
But does this not amount to a real cut in that skilled visa program? Because we're talking about 10,000 Kiwis who are already in this country.
We had an open-ended, the Kiwis got a bit of an open-ended go, and I think it's correct that if we're going to actually plan correctly, we've got to make sure that we put the Kiwis in that category as well, so at least we have full control of the numbers.
Craig, Pat also mentioned communication within the government. Was there discussion between Peter Dutton and senior colleagues in terms of changes to the...
Look, they're things you'll have to ask Peter Dutton, but I've had discussions with Peter Dutton myself, and I've suggested, Peter, you've got to have a look at the migration numbers in this country, because I can tell you from practical experience in Western Sydney and the outer Sydney suburbs, they are really struggling with the pressures of the high rates of migration that we're having at the moment.
Pat, what did you make to that change in the skilled independent visa program?
Well, I thought that was very sneaky. It was also very sneaky of Mr Dutton to change the 190,000 migration target to a ceiling without telling anyone. That was very sneaky. And let's be very clear, migration overwhelmingly is economically beneficial for this country, both in bringing skilled people to this country who contribute to the economy and reducing the average age of our population. We've got an ageing population. We need younger people coming in to support all the retirees. So overwhelmingly it's good. By sneakily cutting migration without having a full-throated debate, this government is just, I think, selling us short.
When you say it was sneaky, Do you think he is, though, actually reflecting the majority opinion of Australians who perhaps are worried about the level of immigration we have at the moment?
Well, let's have a proper debate about it rather than just tweaking a word when Peter Dutton became minister from target to ceiling around 190,000. I'm convinced that the majority of Australians understand that immigration overwhelmingly is a good thing for this country if we do the planning right, if we get the infrastructure investment right, if we get the policies to encourage people to settle in places such as regional New South Wales and cities other than Sydney and Melbourne. But we've got to do that properly instead of just throwing out this sort of red flag to the extreme right of politics where Peter Dutton's clearly sort of courting those Conservative votes in his party room. Like, that's degenerating this debate and cheapening it, and it's really unfortunate.
Craig, another big issue this week has, of course, been energy. Do you think the government will get the support of state and territory ministers for the National Energy Guarantee?
Well, I would hope so. We've heard the ACT government, who actually has a right of veto for the plans for the National Energy Guarantee. So the ACT, about 1% of the nation's energy, can actually say, no, we don't like it, and the whole thing falls over. But what we also need with this, we need the Labor Party, Bill Shorten, and also the Mr Conroy, the member for the Energy Minister. We need them to make very specifically clear that if we put this National Energy Guarantee in place, that they will not change the parameters. They will not change the settings going forward. That is what will give us the certainty we need.
Craig, you're a member of the Monash Forum. What are you seeking to influence as far as energy debate is concerned?
It's very important that we have some type of counterbalance from the avalanche or tidal wave of anti-coal rhetoric we are seeing in all sections of the media. Many people are out there demonising coal. Coal has been the backbone for this nation for many, many years, and it will continue to be so in the future.
Well, let's get clarity here as far as your point of view and the Monash Forum is concerned. Do you want new coal power stations built?
Well, it's very clear. As our coal-fired power stations are closing down and ageing, which they are, we've got Liddell coming up in 2022, and these things take 5 years to plan from start to finish. We need to look at what the rest of the world is doing, and they are building hundreds of coal-fired power stations. Now, the idea that we can get rid of our baseload power and replace it with large batteries and wind turbines and solar panels really is a complete and utter folly. Yes, you can do it technically, but at what cost? If we want to get low electricity prices in this nation, we've got to replace those ageing coal-fired power stations with new modern coal-fired power stations, the latest technology that can deliver power into the grid between 50 and 60 megawatts an hour, $50 and $60 a megawatt hour.
Pat, do you support the National Energy Guarantee?
Well, we're yet to see the full details. We keep seeing dribs and drabs being dribbled out. We've said that we need a bipartisan settlement on energy policy, and we will look at the NEG when the details fully emerge and if it gets through COAG. Let's be very clear, though, if we agree to an NEG, we will ramp up the ambition of the target for emissions reductions upon winning government to at least 45%, cutting greenhouse gas emissions
There goes the
by
certainty.
2030. And the entire
There goes
industry,
the certainty.
all the energy generators that appeared before the Energy Committee that both Craig and I have said, sit on, have said that that doesn't matter, that they're very comfortable having two targets, a 45% with Labor, a 26% with Liberals, as long as all the other rules are set and the notice periods are appropriate. That is the hard evidence of those energy companies before our committee. They will invest as long as the only parameter that varies is the possible target. That is the truth of the matter. Secondly, on coal, Craig is living in a fantasy land, as is the Monash Forum, in terms of the cost. The cheapest and most reliable form of new power generation is a combination of renewables backed up by gas-fired power or pumped hydro and batteries coming in. That is the testimony of the Australian Energy Market Operator. That is the evidence from the Bloomberg New Energy Finance. The entire private sector believes that. The cost of a new coal-fired power station in this country will not be $50 or $60 a megawatt hour. It'll be closer to $130 a megawatt hour. So what Craig is advocating for is higher power prices and increasing greenhouse gas emissions in this country. It would be a disaster, and it shows that the Monash Forum and the Coalition Party group is woefully out of touch with the reality.
Firstly, I have to have a response on a couple of these points. Firstly, what Pat said is very disturbing. If we have a National Energy Guarantee and Labor want to come in later and their policy is to change all the settings, that gets rid of the certainty. This is a very disturbing comment that Pat's made this morning, that Labor wants to change it. If we have a national energy guarantee and we get every state to sign on and Labor want to change it, certainly goes out the window. Secondly, the idea, around the world,
Craig,
we have several hundred coal-fired power stations being constructed around the world. They are coming on, able to produce electricity between $50 and $60 a megawatt hour. Now, the idea that it's saying they're going to cost $120 in Australia, this is a dangerous folly that will put electricity prices up. We know the cost of batteries per megawatt hour is in $500 plus.
Sorry, just quickly, Pat.
Craig, you are factually wrong on the.
Oh, I'm not,
Craig,
Pat. I'm
you
not.
are factually wrong on the cost of coal and on the NEG.
Well, let's
both
get rid of the
Energy
subsidies,
Security
Pat.
Board
Let's
in their
scrub the
briefings
subsidies.
and quite frankly, your own Minister Josh Frydenberg have emphasised that the ambition under the NEG can be ramped up. And the energy
Well, Pat,
companies
that
have
takes
said
away the
that's
certainty.
fine as long as a
If you
prognosis
change all the
period
settings, the
has
certainty's
been-
gone.
Your own minister has said that, Craig.
Okay, gentlemen,
Your
we
own
are,
minister has
we're
said
running out of
ambition
time.
Can be ramped up.
Okay, let's just quickly move on to the issue of leadership. Obviously, at the beginning of the week, Craig, we saw the government led by Malcolm Turnbull lose the 30th news poll in a row. At what point do you say that's enough? We need to change leader if you continue losing.
Look, Mr Turnbull has said, and he's made very clear, that it was a mistake for him to say that. We have to admit it. That's done and gone. He shouldn't have said it in the past. It's not how many you lose, it's how close you are. Now, what 48, 50, depending on how you allocate the preferences, if you allocate the preferences, the Fairfax poll showed, it's about 50-50. So we are very close in striking distance, and the closer that we get to the election, the more we emphasise the difference in policies between what the Labor Party offers and what the Coalition offers. Those numbers are going to get tighter and tighter and tighter.
Unequivocally, can you say Malcolm Turnbull will lead you to the next
Oh,
election?
absolutely.
Without question.
Absolutely. The choice is Malcolm Turnbull or Bill Shorten. That is the choice that the Australian public will have in less than 12 months' time.
Pat, are these polls reflecting more of a disappointment with Malcolm Turnbull's leadership rather than a will of the people to vote in Bill Shorten as the Prime Minister? Does Labor need to do more to sell Bill Shorten?
Well, I think the polls reflect both a willingness to embrace a new vision for the country and a great dissatisfaction with Mr Turnbull's leadership. Mr Turnbull set 4 tests for himself when he overthrew Mr Abbott. One was polls. Well, he's lost 30 news polls in a row. Second was no 3-word slogans, but we hear jobs and growth and electricity bill ad nauseum. Third was a good cabinet government, and we saw this week around the immigration debacle where he and the immigration minister couldn't even agree on what was discussed at cabinet. And fourth, around the economy, where we've got the highest underemployment in recorded history. We've got stagnant wage growth, and the main driver of the jobs growth in the economy has been the NDIS set up by Labor and infrastructure investment at a state level. So on all 4 counts, Mr Turnbull has failed the Australian people, and quite frankly, he's a political carcass swinging in the wind.
Pat Conroy,
Strong words.
Craig Kelly.
Wow.
Thanks
Well,
for joining us.
400,000 new jobs, Pat. You continue to knock it. Record job growth, and we hear nonsense like that. What can you expect?
All right, we'll have
And
to
we
talk.
created it, and the state governments did.
All right, I know you two could go on. That's why we've separated you. You're in the studio. Pat, you're in Newcastle. Thanks very much for joining us. All right, now time to talk sport, and Will joins us as we enter the second last day of the Commonwealth Games.